Okay, we are about to go live by popular request at one of the colleges. We're going to record the session here at the district office so that people that were not able to participate in one of the forums can go back later and see. And sorry, my microphone has slipped off. But thank you all for taking the time to break away from your desk, the daily work, and come out to the spring forum. I've been using these each semester as a way to engage and talk about things that largely I've been working on that you may not be aware of, to talk about things that we're anticipating or responding to or planning for in some capacity, and then to reserve time at the end for some open dialogue. And when I say open dialogue, if this is the first time you've done one of my forums, I truly mean it. There's nothing off, no topics that we can't bring up. Anything that you want to talk about, I'm interested in engaging with you on. So with that, I'm going to try to stick to my time and not go more than about 60 minutes on what I want to share with you, to reserve 30 minutes or so for Q&A. But I find that every successive forum I go longer and longer. As I say things like, oh, I should probably include that. Or questions come up at the other forums, like, oh, let me just build that in because it's on people's minds. So with all of that, the reason that I titled the Spring Forum Leading on Values is because much of the last 13 months now, I have felt like in many ways I've been in a defensive posture in higher education, in community college education specifically, in California. The questions that a few years ago were perhaps conversations that people were having have become political points that are being used to leverage how people view higher education. And specifically, really attacks on education is far too expensive. People don't need four-year degrees to get living wage jobs. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. Colleges and universities are increasingly doing social or cultural indoctrination more than they're doing education. They're charging too much money. Too much federal aid is available. Like all of those conversations have coalesced into political action. Not all of it has been successful, which is part of what I'll talk about as we get more towards the end. But the fact that this is gaining traction is concerning. The fact that being honest about the history of America, our laws, our culture, who was able and had opportunities to be educated, who did not, has now become something we shouldn't talk about because it's divisive. And that we should just pretend that saying that opportunity is equal has solved all of our problems and off we go into the future, I think is fundamentally false. I think is a terrible recipe for repeating the mistakes of the past and not learning from that history. And increasingly, there's pressure to not talk in that way. And so how have I been showing up the last 13 months in my role, internally, externally, around the country at different conferences, talking about my values and how it shapes how I do this work. And I was invited to do a keynote at ACA a couple of weeks ago, the Association of Community College Administrators. And the prompt I was given is, in the present, given the national landscape we're working within now, how are you approaching your work? How are you leading in this moment? And that's what I kept coming back to as I thought, what do I want to say in that space to 150 administrators around our system? That the values guide the work. Now, I preface everything I'm about to say with what I think all of you in the room probably know. I'm very fortunate that we have 5 elected board members who are aligned on their values and aligned with me and my values. So the way that I get to show up and talk is very different than how many other people in a role like mine around the state and country are allowed to show up and speak. Just to our north, our neighbors, Palomar, their board within the last year has removed their land acknowledgement from their board meeting, has rescinded equity statements, has shifted towards that what's becoming nationally a comfortable middle of our job is to give every student a good workforce education. And I've joked that if you go to nationwide conferences in 2021 to 2023, they very much were about the diversity, equity, accessibility, mission of community colleges, being the system that primarily orients itself to serve broad access. It's now workforce conferences. Every session is how do we get students into good paying jobs with as little time in classroom and the possible? And we do that regardless of who you are, which gave me a great talking point to show up and say, you know what? I'm not going to say regardless of who you are, because I think that's dehumanizing. I say we're here to serve you because of who you are. We don't diminish your identities. We value you because of them, because we know that many of you, of us in this room, certainly our students coming in, their identities have dictated whether or not they could be educated. Literally, that time in our country where it was illegal to teach certain people to read based on their skin color, based on their gender. Within my lifetime, women have had the opportunity to have a bank account where a man, their father, or a spouse, or somebody else wasn't the primary on that account. This isn't ancient history, right? We need to be mindful of our past because it shapes our present. And if we pretend that we can ignore that and just say, well, regardless of who you are, you can be here. And whether or not you succeed is totally on you. It's fundamentally false. And we'll never close the equity gaps we continue to see because they are rooted in a very intentional foundation. So what am I going to share with you? As I was reflecting on what I wanted to talk about at ACA, things that I've talked about at other conferences I've been on, I realized, I haven't stopped and cataloged everything that we've accomplished, really going back to when I came into the district, October 16th, 2020, in the middle of an upheaval, right? Middle of kind of height of COVID. A lot was going to have to change and had been forced on us. And our district has done a lot of things for the first time since October 16, 2020. And I'm not standing here saying, I did this, I deserve credit, this is somehow about what I've done. It's work that needed to be done that I have been part of in some ways. But I want to share, what have we collectively done over the last 6 years coming up on, but particularly the last 3 or 4 years, and remind ourselves that at times where it has been very difficult, we have accomplished some pretty transformative things. We have defied cultural and social norms in a way that has, I think, increased equity for employees, for students. And so I want to share that as a way of framing, how do we think about the future? All right, Dan, first cue to click on the slide. So what I just did, recognizing that we are in a moment where people are challenging the value proposition of higher education. Perhaps not as much at community colleges, but how many hundreds of millions of dollars in research funding in some of the most prominent institutions in the country have been cut over disagreements about policy statements, about policies, about affinity celebrations. We're going to slash hundreds of millions of dollars of research into cancer treatments over this battle of ideologies. Last year, at about this time, a proposal was making its way through the House that would reduce the maximum Pell Grant award, that would increase the number of units you have to take to get the maximum award, and completely eliminate Pell for students who take fewer than 7.5 units a semester. That would have cut 1/3 of our district's Pell Grants off of financial aid support from the federal government. Over 4,500 students overnight, if that had passed, would have lost the Pell Grant. Who are we cutting access to education for? The people most impacted by generational poverty, by redlining in housing, by discrimination in who gets to show up and be educated, who gets to do what kind of work. How is it that in the context of these elite universities are doing more social dogma than they are legitimate education, do we decide that we should disenfranchise the people who would benefit most from pathways to higher education, living wage employment? We are in a moment where even we, our students, are being threatened and challenged in that. And that can feel daunting when I think about the idea of I'm now going to go meet with members of the House of Representatives, with senators, with state elected officials, and say, work with me in challenging the federal government on this. That is a weird moment to find yourself in trying to have that conversation. But I recognize these are precedented times. People have faced this before and actually faced a lot worse. We're fortunate to have inherited America after the Civil Rights Act has been in effect for 60 years. Now we're experiencing a moment where enforcement of civil rights is being gutted And I would argue that if you take away the enforcement of your right, you take away the ability to actually have your right. In the last year, all of the headlines from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission have been when they have sued organizations over discrimination against white males and people based on their religion, and that religion primarily being Jewish. Our district has had dozens now of complaints that were based on race, ethnicity, other protected characteristics, closed without investigation by the EEOC. And I do not view that as a positive thing. If we are doing something wrong, we need to be held accountable as employers. They have de-emphasized enforcing race-based discrimination unless it's perpetuating this idea that there's rampant reverse discrimination in the world. That's saying, you know what? We have underinvested in Hispanic communities, therefore we should have an Hispanic serving institution designation and funding to go ensure that we're properly serving communities that have not been properly served in the past, means you're now discriminating against somebody else. I don't think it's legal. I think that the idea behind it is completely false, but it's happening. And we have a history that we can look to, people that stood up against that way of thinking and acting and legislating as models of how to act in this time. So every year around Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, I like to go back and read different speeches, and not just the highlights, the quotes that have been integrated into mainstream society, but the entirety of what he had to say. Because a lot of times, in the words of somebody else I heard recently, Martin Luther King's words get whitewashed. Very intentional use of language there to feel a lot more palatable to everyone. But he had some real criticisms to share of American society, some very valid criticisms that we need to hear, collectively calling us into self-reflection. Is this who we mean to be? Are these our values? A society where your ability to eat lunch beside me is dictated by the color of your skin, your national origin, the language you're speaking, your gender. Is that who we want to be? So one of the speeches I went to that I draw on for how do we show up in this moment was delivered in 1967 at the Riverside Church in New York City. The entirety of the speech is a condemnation of America's role in Vietnam and calling on America to end its war in Vietnam and to recognize the immense harms that it was doing and questioning to whose benefit are these immense harms being done. And in the midst of it, he says something that resonates with me in this moment. We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life, there is no such thing as being too late. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action. What does he mean when he says there's no such thing as too late? That we don't get to use that as an excuse. Oh, well, it's too late. There's nothing we can do about it. We have, in the words of Dr. Chris Emdin, a response ability. The pause indicating two different words. We have the capacity to take action. Our inaction is a delegation of our responsibility, our obligation. I think about myself in this role. As a cisgender, heterosexual, white male, born in America, generations deep, I have the opportunity to navigate most of our society very comfortably and safely. I could right now say, you know, it'd be a lot more comfortable if I just stay quiet and I join in the workforce education movement. And I advise the board, you know, if we took down some of the language on the website, we wouldn't be targets maybe. If we just kind of like combined all the affinity celebrations with the main one and didn't really call it out, we'd be a little bit safer. If we did these things, we would appease certain political ideologies, but we would abandon our values immediately. All of the corporations, I think of Target, who went back and revised things. And so in 2020, when they were posting on social media black boxes with white text and saying what their values were, we found out in 2025 what their values were, because overnight they erased all of that and said, whoa, that's a little bit uncomfortable. We're going to fire the equity positions that we've hired. We're going to change the language. I know exactly where their values lie, their own comfort, security, and safety. And they will not make themselves uncomfortable on behalf of other people. So I have a board that not only allows me, but I think expects me to show up and lead. I look around, who am I showing up on behalf of? 90,000 students, over 70% of which come from communities of color. Among our employees, 60%. People who may not be able to show up safely, comfortably in the spaces that I can. And my job title gets me access to meetings that many others wouldn't be able to get. I can go meet with the mayor. I can go meet with assembly members. I can meet with the Department of Education. If I'm unwilling to show up in that moment because it's a little bit uncomfortable, how dare I have this job? This is the time for vigorous, positive action. So back in the fall, I was debating, should we go to DC this year? What's the point? Sarah Jacobs, Scott Peters, Juan Vargas, Mike Levin, all vote for everything that we would go in there and ask them to. I'm not going to convince them of anything. I can't meet with Darrell Issa. He won't meet with us. Plus, if I did, I don't think he would want to listen to me. What's the point? The Association of Community Colleges, the Association of Community College Trustees has made this pivot to a comfortable middle. I can kind of understand. They've got to represent trustees in Kentucky, Florida, Texas, California, Oregon, and everywhere in between. You can't talk the way I'm talking, continue to have invitations to come to North Carolina in that role. So they've got to show up differently. And I know some of the people there, they're doing the work. They're just not talking about the work they're doing. But I have a different situation. I don't have to hide like that. If I don't show up at that conference, who else is going to talk the way I'm talking? I can't rely on my colleague at Palomar. Her board's not going to let her do that. So I embrace that opportunity as a responsibility and lead on values because I have that ability, which creates a responsibility. As I start to transition now to what have we accomplished in recent years, what the thread I want to point out is that every decision that I've been involved in, I think with rare exception, has really been about this second bullet point. Shifting away from maintaining status quos to identify where have we marginalized, where have we underinvested, and focus our attention there first. So let's talk about some of those things. Investing in people. Everybody knows cost of living in San Diego, cost of housing in San Diego. The fact that the funded cost of living adjustments that we get on our revenue from the state do not keep pace with regional affordability issues, that we're not even funded in that way. A couple of years ago, I proposed to our system that we modify the way that we're funded to account for those cost of living issues, because it affects employees, but also affects how we operate as a district. We get the same per FTES, full-time equivalent student funding, as Copper Mountain. Very different costs of construction, of utilities, of operating, but we're funded the same way. There should be an adjustment to that. But in the absence of receiving that, I was unwilling to say, you know what, let's just continue to do what we've always done and bemoan the fact that we don't get more money to do something different. Instead, let's sharpen our pencils or Excel spreadsheets, go to work and figure out within what we do have, how much more could we actually do if that was our first priority? And that's where the living wage came from. The idea of being out in front of people talking about everybody in our community should have the opportunity to come participate in our education programs and go out and get a living wage job. Oh, but if your idea of your career is to come work in our district serving people's ability to access education, we're going to benchmark ourselves to a labor market founded in discrimination and not pay you a living wage. So sorry, if you're the one making sure that the lights are on and the floors are clean, you don't get to have a living wage because nobody else is paying it. So we broke from that and said our gauge will no longer be what's the average salary of somebody in a custodial position in San Diego. Our gauge will be what does an organization like MIT studying living wage in different regions say you need to make in order to be able to meet your basic needs in San Diego, which is where the number came from, $30.50 an hour at the time, 58 cents an hour at the time. In a household with 2 incomes and 2 dependents, which if you just kind of take an average of many of our working professionals, Each person needs to earn, as of January 1, 2024, at least $30.58 an hour, $63,000 a year on average. Collectively in that household, $126,000 a year, just above the median for our county. And that's what we benchmarked the living wage to. Was it easy? No. Was it possible? Absolutely. When that became our values and the work that we should be focused on, it was possible. And we did it. When we revised the supervisor's salary schedule and collapsed A and B into one, the biggest impact was raising the floor of that schedule significantly. You can see the historical schedules on the website, SDCCD compensation. Go down to SPA, look at historical schedules, compare what the entry levels on the A and B schedule were in 2022, and look where the entry level is now. Same thing on the management salary schedule. The biggest increases, bringing the floor up. The people who had been most impacted by our history of tying ourselves to a labor market that has always been rigged, and then telling people, well, because that's the average of the comparators around us, there's a logic to it, this is justified, and we're fine with that being the reality. We broke from that norm to uplift areas where we had underinvested and marginalized. We did it with the POA schedule, we did it with the NANCE schedule, and on July 1, it's happening to the faculty schedule. These things were not lacking in controversy in some areas, and the faculty one is generating a lot of conversation. If you're not aware of what's happening on July 1, right now our faculty salary schedule has 6 columns in it. The columns are dictated by your educational achievement. So if you want to come instruct in welding, which is not a PhD pathway, and most people who are really great welding instructors do not have master's degrees, you get paid starting salary $30,000 less than if you have a PhD in English literature and you're coming to teach English. Why? Why is that the case? At what moment in time did a group of people sit down and decide this is the appropriate way to compensate people? What were their values? Who were they? Where were they? We don't ask any of those questions because that's just the way it's done, the world that we've inherited, so we're just going to go along and not challenge this. Had the opportunity to challenge some of those assumptions. And particularly with our schedule, having faculty starting at $68,000 a year at the bottom of that schedule, and then having on the PhD column, it's starting basically at $90,000, which is still too low. I do not dispute that. But who am I going to address first? The people that are already on the high end and saying, well, that's too low, so let's give you a raise first. Or we'll do it proportional and we'll just incrementally try to make 2% progress per year. It'll take us generations to correct the problem. Instead, let's focus the majority of our time and attention and resources on where the greatest harm has been done. Who has been underinvested in? Who has been marginalized by the status quo that we have all been born into? As I came into the district, almost all of us were working remotely. The district did not have a remote work policy. Most people had not worked remotely at any type of scale before the pandemic, but we knew coming out of it, we wanted to continue to have that flexibility. So we created a remote work policy that offered the maximum amount of flexibility of being responsive to the needs of the work and the individual to determine what level of remote work can be done. It has not been perfectly implemented. It has been difficult in some places for people to figure out how best to do that. It has required reimagining how work is done in some ways. And in some areas, there's been some struggle with that process. I always knew going in that was going to be the case. This is going to be a transformational change in the way that we've operated. It will take time to get it right. It'll take time for people to figure out how to make it work. The same thing happening right now today with the 36-hour operational pilot. Now, while the feedback I've heard for the most part has been overwhelmingly positive, I know there are elements out there where it's a struggle. And we're having to go through that struggle. What's at the other end of this? A decision point on, is this something that we could do in perpetuity that would have a net positive impact on everyone? We could expand the range of services by rethinking modalities for our students. We could expand work-life balance for employees by rethinking the days and the times and the wheres and the hows you're doing your work. We can use it as an opportunity to really look at how does the flow of business happen? What work is done that comes in and becomes my work, and where does the work I do go off to? Can we streamline that, make it more efficient, make it more effective, make it more equitable? The idea of doing this pilot has forced that conversation in a lot of places. We didn't necessarily have to have that conversation in the absence of trying to do something that broke from the norm. Who was it, where, when, and why that we decided that Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. was the thing we should all be doing? And we know as community colleges, for a large percentage of our students, that definitely doesn't work. And as employees, we all have to figure out how to get our banking done and our dentist appointments and the DMV and cards, tire repair, whatever, when the rest of them are all working Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Not as big of a problem in a large city like San Diego, but in many of the small towns I've lived in my life, the only way to get your personal business done was to take time off of work. If we rethink how we operate, how much could we expand flexibilities that allow people to have more control over the pace and day of their life? Over the last 4 years, we've created 70 new full-time faculty positions. Not we deleted some and replaced them, but we have increased the number of full-time faculty positions by 70. To give you a sense of the magnitude of that investment, in 2021, we received $3.2 million from the state in full-time faculty hiring funds. $3.2 million at the start of what it would cost to pay them, we could have created about 30 positions. Very quickly, it would cost us a lot more than $3.2 million because people move up on the salary schedule gets COLAs. Health benefits have gone up 30% in the last 3 years. We've absorbed those costs, PERS, STIRS, et cetera. We have created closer to $10 million in new costs out of an additional $3 million by investing additional unrestricted general fund resources. Because we know in many areas, students have better outcomes when we have tenured faculty teaching them and not relying on adjunct faculty. Our system has a history of being able to meet the totality of student demand by hiring the least amount of full-time faculty possible and doing the most amount of adjunct faculty instruction possible, because it's cheaper. Do we want to be the system of we did it cheaper and faster? Do we want to be the system of we give our students the highest quality education we can possibly do within the resources we have? Quantity is not quality, right? We've created roughly the same number of classified professional positions, many in student services areas. Direct human-to-human interaction to help students navigate a very complicated system. If you have not tried to register and enroll in a class in our district, one, you're going to need more time you think you do. You're going to need to find more documents than you think you do, but I recommend trying it. See what it is that we put students through just to get in. It's not as easy as streamlined as it should be. And so investing in more people to help students navigate that system until we have streamlined that process and that system, I think it's essential work for investing in where we have underinvested in the past. So in the fall, when we do this forum, I expect the thing I'm going to be spending the most time on is the climate survey that we did back in the fall. Just got the first blush of part of the responses, the quantitative data. And what immediately I saw looking at the results for our district-wide, the district office, each one of the colleges, and the statewide results, is that transparency in leadership, communication from leadership, and trust in leadership are where the biggest gaps are right now. Across our district, roughly 30% of the respondents have serious questions and doubts in those 3 areas. I think they're all interrelated. You increase any one of those, and the other 2 are going to come with it. Investing in the areas we have not invested enough in, hearing that feedback and putting it to work. Investing in technology and innovation. So in 2022, if I remember right, around the time that we were reorganizing and IT services came in to be part of what got renamed People and Culture, we participated in the Chancellor's office offer of a penetration test. They set cybersecurity experts to try to get unauthorized access into our systems, into PeopleSoft, into Canvas, into our budget systems. We had 700 and more than 740 vulnerabilities that they identified they were able to access our systems. I lost a little bit of sleep because if any bad actor out there decided, I want to get in there, encrypt all of your employee and student data, and charge you $10 million for the encryption key, we were vulnerable to that risk. And that's not an abstract threat. It's happened to LA Unified. It's happened to Gavilan College within our own system. Quick funny story on that. The ransomers wanted Bitcoin. This was back in like 2018. And so Gavilan acquired the Bitcoin, put it into a digital account. People never came and claimed it. Gavilan had to sell the Bitcoin and they made some profit. We're usually not allowed to speculate like that. But the bad side is they never got the encryption key. So what did they have to do? Rebuild from paper and memory as much of those records as they could. Imagine if we lost access to all of our student and employee records and had to rebuild as much as we could from whatever paper and memory and thumb drives that we have out there with information on them. So we immediately went to work. We put a lot of time and resources towards having fully updated operating systems with all of the security patches, building a process of having that done routinely, which we're not quite there yet, but we've made a lot of headway, of implementing multi-factor authentication, now single sign-on. It hasn't been rolled out perfectly. The level of transparency and communication to trust in how that was going to be done, some lessons learned from it. But today we are in a much safer place than we are. So as you think about the fact that your social security number, bank accounts, if you do direct deposit, are all property of the district, I can tell you here today that we are way more secure with your information. And I don't think you're going to be getting a letter from us the way you might have from big organizations like Target and Best Buy and Fidelity and others saying, so your data was inappropriately accessed and here's 12 months of free credit monitoring just in case. We have invested now in artificial intelligence tools. So there's two things I want to say to this because this is a really hot topic around the district in different spaces. The first is that the power of agentic AI that I immediately see for us is to relieve ourselves of the manual, repetitive tasks that don't require our intelligence or creativity to perform. When I was hired in the district, we entered data for you to have medical insurance. It was entered in 3 different systems. And I found out firsthand what kind of human error can happen because I went to fill a prescription for my wife at a pharmacy, and the pharmacist was trying to figure out why a male would need the prescription that I was there asking for my wife because somebody at Viva saw that my wife's name is spelled Lindsay, conventionally the spelling that a man who's referred to as Lindsay would spell it, and thought, oh, somebody must have inadvertently put female and put her down as male. Now, I was vice chancellor at the time, so I could quickly make a phone call, like, hey, I'm at the pharmacy, I need to pick up this prescription. Can we get that fixed? But if I was an adjunct faculty member in our district who didn't even know where the district HR office was or the fact that we had a benefits office, that could have been a weeks-long process. If we didn't have to do the same data entry in 3 different systems in order to have that coverage, we would eliminate that failure rate. Also, the amount of time that people spent doing the same repetitive data entry could have been spent on providing more direct services to employees about understanding the breadth of options available to them, what the choices mean, understanding how they might figure out what are my short-term and long-term needs, what's the best option for me now, when should I be coming back and rethinking this. Much more valuable use of time and not something that I can program at this point in our lives, an AI chatbot to do for you. For our students who just need quick information to navigate the system, I don't need an interaction. I just need the answer to this question. We don't need human beings to do that anymore. And that's a good thing because our students need a lot of other things that require a lot of human interaction. Let's relieve ourselves of that. Do the other. On the other side of this, questions about, is AI going to destroy humanity? If we use it poorly, it has that ability. Who is going to ensure that we are collectively smart enough to not use AI in that way? Do we trust the companies to do it? Do you trust that Meta, Google, or Alphabet, OpenAI, even Anthropic, are going to do the right thing morally, ethically, responsibly when massive amounts of profit, trillions of dollars, are hanging in the margins? Do you think that our public officials, our elected officials who write laws and policies are going to set aside the financial interest of having one of those companies donate hundreds of millions of dollars to their election campaign to write the correct law over the one that satisfies their interests? I think education is where that happens. Education is where people whose first interest is humanity, the morality, the ethics. Education is where teaching people what exactly is artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence, agentic artificial intelligence, quantum computing, quantum physics. How does this work? What does it mean? Why is it important to you? How should you expect companies to behave? How should you demand your elected officials legislate? That's where it happens. If we abdicate our responsibility and say, you know what, we just don't like it, wish it wasn't here, and we're going to opt out, somebody else is going to do that work. Who? I think we have a really important role to play in shaping this, socially, culturally. Looking at what we could learn from data analytics about how to best serve our communities and serve each other. Imagine if one of our faculty members, anyone in any class, knew overnight 70% of students experienced a very similar challenge with this part of the thing that you were teaching on Tuesday. As they were going through the assignments, the instructional exercises, consistently had challenges around that. You now know on Thursday what is the most important thing that you can be addressing in the classroom, instead of having to guess at it, instead of trying to check in and hope students give you real feedback on where they're struggling. Far more effective, efficient, equitable use of time. If we could relieve instructors of the basic interaction, I need to clarify something. Agentic AI can take a syllabus, course materials, and be able to give students that immediate response 24/7, 365. Now I can spend my time with the instructor on far more valuable interactions. If we could know from the data the way that our course schedules are affecting students' ability to complete timely, and see that data at scale across the district, create more effective schedules. If we could know at the course level, how are students succeeding in our anthropology classes when we disaggregate based on their different identities and characteristics? Where do we focus our time, attention, and resources? There are powerful insights. And so when we talk about it, say enterprise data warehouse, the ability to take the different systems that we use, bring all of that data into a central place, use machine learning to do the base level of analysis, and then put human beings to work on doing more advanced analyses and meaning making out of that data. If you've been to one of my presentations on EEO data, you've probably heard me say this before. The data is the data. How we feel about it, what we decide to do with it, the machine can't do that for us. Excel can't tell us how we should feel about the standard deviation in the hiring rates between two groups. We have to decide that. And if we could spend less time on the mechanics and more time on that, we could get much better outcomes. Investing in infrastructure and policy. So since January 2024, Miramar has been using anonymous screening on virtually every single recruitment they've done. And I started to look at the data, and I'm not through with it, but I can tell you they're getting different results on who makes it to interviews than the rest of us have been. The biases that we bring when we can see somebody's name, where they went to high school, the companies they've worked for, the colleges they went to, they are deeply ingrained. And simply removing that information, I can't say with causality yet, but there's definitely a correlation in the outcomes that Miramar's getting. And I think that data is going to be compelling for us adopting that district-wide as a policy. Investing our time and energy in understanding where have we marginalized people, intentionally or otherwise, and where should we invest in going forward. As we get into our bond program, we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity, perhaps, very rare in California, to go to voters for a bond where your lead projects are athletics and performing arts and have that bond pass. Voters typically do not want to vote for that. You go out there and talk about asbestos removal and clean water, they vote for it because no one wants to send their kid to a school that's a health risk. But you talk about a football stadium, not so much. We got a bond passed where the majority of the projects were athletics and performing arts, replacing the Seville Theater at City College, replacing the Performing Arts Center at Mesa, building the first Performing Arts Center at Miramar, all on the first tier of projects. A dramatic overhaul of the athletics facilities at Mesa College, because we approved the expenses when we first built the college back in 1964, but since then have not been able to pass a bond measure to rehabilitate those facilities. So if you've been to any of our basketball gyms, they do not have air conditioning. At Miramar, they have a basketball court where they hang up curtains because on the other side, through our joint use with the city, residents are playing pickleball. Investing in the things that we haven't been able to because we have an opportunity. We have the ability to do that kind of work right now. As we look at going into why would we bother with looking at the district's visual identity, that rebranding effort, a new logo, a tagline, all of that, because it says so much to our community about who we are and what our values are. And it hadn't been updated in over 20 years roughly. And plus everybody told us, I see no connection to the colleges. So you've got this six-sided ninja throwing star looking thing, that for the district. And then you've got very different visual identities for the college. Took that and created something that integrates our identities in a way that people could see. And as we told that story through innovative marketing, for the first time putting unrestricted general funds into a district-wide marketing campaign, in part just to tell people, this is who we are, this is what we're about. Also to do enrollment marketing, but telling our story in a very different way, to connect around a different kind of identity. It is no longer we offer affordable education. We uplift communities through education. It is no longer about you turn yourself into something that can succeed here and you'll be fine, because we treat everybody the same, regardless of who you are, to we will commit to trying to be what you need us to be for you to succeed in the context of your intersecting identities and lived experiences. A place where each of us can just show up and be. And we will not have to go looking for belonging or create that space when we know it was never built for us. Because we know if we can create those first two, the becoming, the success is almost guaranteed. Why are we leading on housing? It is the issue of our time that demands action. I am astounded that we have 20,000 students roughly across our district who have no guarantee on where they're going to sleep tonight. They are there because of the kindness of somebody else. You can stay on my couch, you can use this extra room, you can kind of reconfigure my garage. But if we get into an argument that night, you can kick me out. I have no legal recourse. And still showing up and succeeding in their classes. Graduate students at UCSD living in their car, completing their doctoral programs. The human spirit is amazing. But that should not be tolerable to us. We should not be okay with the fact that that exists. And in 2021, I would have said housing is way too expensive and complicated and regulated. We're going to stay out of that business. But nobody else is filling the need. And then we have an opportunity because the state offers some planning grant money. And then we take it to voters and they say, yes, we will support a bond that includes affordable housing at City College. And then I'll talk about when we get to the end, Nancy Skinner, senator up in the Bay Area, says, we're really going to take the lid off of this and allow local agencies to come together and form their own housing finance authorities. So I'll talk about what that's going to be at the end. Investing in student success and advocacy. We've had significant expansions in basic needs across our colleges. And a lot of that started with short-term state funding. At times where there were budget surpluses, oh, here's 3 years to do mental health. What happens at the end of 3 years? The mental health need doesn't go away. We have committed a lot of resources to be able to sustaining things that started with short-term funding, including our contract with Timely Care, which also wasn't completely without controversy. But what that did, Timely Care, is provide a 24/7 access to medical services, to mental health services. And for the first time in our district's history, every student at continuing education had the opportunity to use that service. We do not have student health centers for CE. They don't pay a student health fee. There have been controversies in our past around our credit colleges not wanting to let CE students in because they don't pay the fee. And we're already tax serving the students we have, so we can't meet their needs. Thinking differently about how we invest where we haven't before. How do we uplift what has been marginalized? Bringing in one-time federal funding to build out pride centers, student parent centers, and then figuring out how do we fund and expand this ongoing. Because we know that 30% plus of our students are parents, and they have needs that can't be met by the way we've always done it. And we can't say, well, regardless of who you are, you can come here and study as long as you hold your end of the bargain and you put in the work, when they're trying to figure out how do I navigate childcare and the fact that I can't show up to classes Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. because I have a job and a family to support. But you're not willing to give a schedule that is accommodating to the flexibilities I need. To think differently about what we do, who benefits from it and who doesn't, in alignment with values. Why is expanding baccalaureate degree programs such an emphasis for our district? It's not just because Marty Block was a trustee who became an assembly member, who became a senator that championed the legislation. It's not just because Constance Carroll made it a key priority for her to work on. I didn't inherit that and say, well, that's what they were doing, I guess that's what I should do. It's because that is a transformative pathway for people. For less than $10,500 all 4 years in a program that was designed with industry to meet local employment needs, where we have gone out and measured how many jobs are there going to be available. Do these lead to living wage careers? And intentionally designed to respond to the needs of our community. And then we have to have fights with the CSU system about offering it. Well, we have a college 500 miles away that was thinking about that, so maybe you stay in your lane. You're not serving our community up in Humboldt, Redwoods, San Bernardino. We should not be in arguments with them about what degrees we offer to meet San Diego's needs, our residents, our industry, our economy. Fortunately, at San Diego State and at UCSD, President De La Toro, Chancellor Kosler are far more collaborative than their system office would wish they would be. And we don't have to have those fights in the same way. But I see it as a primary aspect of our mission to offer as many baccalaureate degree programs as we can, and to be a leading voice in the state on we should be duplicating if the CSU system can't serve the need. There is a nursing baccalaureate bill back on the agenda this year. The governor has vetoed it twice. I have no hope that he's going to sign it this time, but we're going to continue to throw the support of our district behind it because we need to continue to tell that story. 75% of the bachelor degrees of science and nursing in California are awarded by private institutions. That's who we're coming after. The people that are charging $100,000 to get that degree, saddling students with huge amounts of debt as they do it. We could offer that degree for $10,500 and we wouldn't need a single additional investment of state funding to do it, other than the growth revenue for the FTS allocation. CSU system is not coming to the governor and saying, for $0, we could quadruple the number of nursing bachelor's degrees being offered in the state. That's the power we have because of the way we're funded, because of the way that we operate. Why is expanding dual enrollment important? How many people in our community have had the kind of messages my niece has had over the course of her life, that she's not smart enough to go to school? Some of you may have heard me tell this story. Right as I was graduating with my master's degree, I brought my parents down to LA. We went to USC. And that day I get a text from my niece asking for a picture of my diploma. That explained to her they give you a pretty envelope that has nothing in it. Diploma comes in the mail. And I thought she would just forget about it, like it was a novelty in the moment. But a couple of weeks later, she texts and said, have you got your diploma yet? I still need that picture. So I called her. Why do you need a picture of my diploma? Because my friend told me there's no way that somebody in our family was smart enough to get a master's degree and go to USC. So she got that picture very quickly. But then we had a follow-up conversation. Haley, you can do this too. Like, there's nothing special about me having done this. You absolutely are smart enough and capable. But in the meantime, she's got her mom telling her when she came home and said, you know, I'd really like to go into child psychology, I think, that you're not smart enough to do that and you should go to cosmetology school. And to this day, have not been able to get her to enroll in college. She has internalized these messages. For how many people has that kind of explicit and implicit messaging shaped how they see themselves and their ability to succeed in college and create self-barriers that were imposed by other people? Dual enrollment can undo all of that. What you learned successfully completing college classes while you're in high school primarily is that you can succeed in college. I don't even care necessarily what class it was. You start to unlearn any myths about whether or not you're college material. That could have life-changing, family-changing, community-changing outcomes when people unlearn the social stigmas that we've imposed. That's why it's important. Not funding formulas, not that's where the growth is, not, well, San Diego Unified's enrollment's dropping, so where's our enrollment going to be in 15 years if we don't start thinking? All of that may be true, but at the heart of it is how do we connect with people that have been underinvested in, have been marginalized, and focus our attention on their pathway? It's the same idea as accessibility. Reasonable accommodations are nice. We identify how one person needs a solution to navigate the physical environment we've created that doesn't work for them. Accessibility opens it up for everybody. We all benefit when we focus our attention that way. It's that economic mobility piece, that socioeconomic mobility. Investing in our financial health and values. So I think many of you in the room know that in 2019, our ending fund balance was under 3%, meaning the amount of dollars we had at the end of the year was less than 3% of the expenses we had this year, which means basically we had no safety net. The state can't pay us. The apportionment that we're due, we're in trouble. Today, we're over 23%. From $6 million to $94 million. Why is that important? Because about $170 million of our funding comes not from local property taxes, not from enrollment fees, but the money the state collects and then distributes out. So if they have a budget shortfall and they decide, yeah, you were supposed to get 170 million, but we're only going to send you 160. And in the last several years, they've learned that they can issue IOUs. Just say, well, you'll get it the next year. But we don't get to go back and tell people that are due payroll, well, we'll pay you in a few months when we get the money. We don't get to tell the electric company, yeah, you'll get the check when we get the money. All of our vendors. So we have real-time expenses and revenue volatility. This allows me to stand in front of you with absolute confidence that your paycheck's going to arrive on time, check's not going to bounce. That we can make investments in expanding programs, and if the enrollment doesn't immediately come, we could absorb higher expenses for a few years. Last August, when we got letters from the Department of Education saying, we have determined that your Hispanic Serving Institution grant or STEM grants and your Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander Serving Institution grants are no longer aligned with the administration's priorities, and we're ending them immediately. Wind down the program by September 30th. Students immediately asking in those programs, am I going to be able to come here after September? Faculty, classified professionals, some administrators asking, am I going to have a job? Am I about to be laid off? Because we had the financial resources, I could immediately say, absolutely not. We're not stopping any of that work. It all continues. And we will figure it out. Because worst case scenario, I've got $94 million I can use on one-time expenses for us to figure that out. To then go advocate at the state for a student support or a student success block grant, to advocate for additional state funding in our student equity and achievement program and other areas. Because the outcomes of the work say we should keep doing that work, but now we need to rethink how we're doing it. Without that financial stability, we can't do any of that. We're on the verge of one thing goes wrong. Do we need to talk about layoffs, downsizing, cuts, who, where? Creates so much insecurity for all of us when that's the situation. Looking at how we invest in people being able to go participate statewide. I was having lunch with our classified Senate presidents last year. They said, you know, our academic Senate presidents and many of the executive team get to go to their statewide meetings, their plenaries every single year. we've never been able to go to one of the statewide Senate functions. And so I put $20,000 for them to be able to do that this year. 5,000 to each college, take as many people as you can. If we don't invest in our classified senates being able to participate, how can we expect that we're going to get meaningful participation in our local governance processes? We need that voice, that perspective to shape all the decisions that we have to make as a district. When I looked at what we spend supporting study abroad programs, primarily in Western Europe, and the fact that study abroad programs in Africa, Southeast Asia, much of South America, were add-ons if we had some money, particularly a categorical fund for it, but not structurally investments we were making. And when President Shabazz came and said, we have this tremendous opportunity to have people participate in the All Africa Diaspora Education Summit in Ghana, and amazing experiences coming back that are reshaping how we're doing work and serving our students. If we only had enough support for more people to go. Since he came to that, we've had more than 70 employees go on that trip. Investing in the things that we say by our values are important to us and having that show up in the way we spend the money. Because ultimately, the truth that I can always count on is if I know how you spend your money and your time, I know what your values are. I don't need you to tell me. I can see it in action. The two most limited and valuable resources we have, our money and our time. If we look at our district's budget as an expression of our values, what will we actually say our values are? That's the kind of question I ask myself. I ask the board. I challenge Chancellor's cabinet with. So looking ahead, I want to talk very briefly about Civic Center, San Diego State Partnership, and then I'll close the Housing Finance Authority, and then we'll open up for questions. So you may have heard that the mayor in his State of the City address back in January say, and I'm announcing a collaboration with the San Diego Community College District on Civic Center redevelopment. Behind the scenes, the decision for that to be included in his address happened about 48 hours before the actual address. So we've been involved in this conversation for 18 months. And the origin of it really was May 2023. I was in the acting role. And I got invited to join Dr. Denise Rogers at Mesa College as she took a group of students out to a local resident's home who has a very large African art collection. And basically, he delivers a guest lecture using his collection, and came back and toured our World Arts collection, more than 2,000 pieces now. The largest collection of African art on the West Coast outside of the Fowler Museum at UCLA. An increasingly large collection of indigenous Southeast Asian art. It is an amazing collection. And if you know how to get there, you could navigate to the top of the LRC, the library at Mesa, and actually go see some of it. But I assume that most of you have just left to your own devices. It would take you a week to find it because it is buried in a maze. And if somebody hadn't been guiding me, I never would have found it. When I went and saw it, this is an amazing resource that we have that should be out in the community being experienced. So since that day in May 2023, one of my goals has been build a museum to house that collection, open up to the public. The problem with doing it at Mesa College is you have to make an intentional effort to go to Mesa College. You're not in the area and like, oh, hey, what's going on over there? I think I'll swing by. And so we looked at Seaport Village as being renovated. That didn't work out. Maybe we can do a partnership in Balboa Park with one of the existing museums. That didn't really work out. Maybe there's land in Balboa Park we could acquire. We tested that in some early bond polling. That was not supported. Then this conversation, Prebys Foundation asks, hey, we're looking at reimagining Civic Center, which was built in the 1960s to be a center of city governance. We will create this space where elected officials, city workers, bureaucrats are bumping into each other in the natural course of their day in this core of civic engagement. The community can come down and interact. I don't know if that ever happened, but that's not what Civic Center Plaza is today. You want to go downtown and take a look. It's not a place that people want to come and congregate. And so they said, imagine if it was an arts and culture center for San Diego. So as soon as they said those two words, I have the idea. What do you think about this? And so we took some of them to Mesa College, showed them the collection, talked about, imagine a 20,000 square foot museum gallery space with this collection on display. Our museum studies students working in this as a form of work-based learning. Our faculty being able to invite researchers, other college and university classes, other programs from around our district, art history, art, all of our ethnic studies programs, world history programs, many others, to come use that collection as part of their instruction. A 5,000 square foot performance space so you can experience the many pieces of that collection that were built to be used in rituals, ceremonies, cultural events within the community, not to be viewed behind large panes of glass in the Western European tradition. We could take it out into cultural events around the city, around the year. Imagine what that could look like. They were very interested. So we've continued to have this conversation. And the mayor's office reached out. So we really want to put momentum behind this. What do you think about the mayor saying all of that? Not all of that, but saying about this partnership in the address. I said, absolutely. That might be the thing that starts to generate enough excitement around this that we can get real momentum behind it. So we're working right now to get a negotiating agreement in place with the city so that we can go do our due diligence on what would it take to demolish the current Golden Hall building, to build that facility. How does the central plant and utilities functions all intertwine? If you knock down Golden Hall, does that disrupt things in the current city hall? What's Civic Theater's future look like? If we can work through all of those logistics and come to an endpoint that is financially viable for the district, then we just might build a 50,000 square foot educational center in downtown San Diego that brings that collection out for residents, tourists, etc. Transforms the way people see the role of our district, Mesa College, and that collection as an asset for the entire community. The San Diego State Partnership, so in the fall, the guaranteed admissions piece starts, with the exception of 5 programs that are impacted. But students who complete their final 12 units of credit with our district, one of our credit colleges, and meets all the academic requirements, guaranteed a transfer spot to San Diego State. What San Diego State did in making that guarantee was say, instead of prioritizing students that might have higher academic achievement in high school or in community college from outside of our area, we're going to reserve those spots for as many San Diego residents as we can. 97% of the students in our district are residents of San Diego. It's a priority on serving our community first. Now, the bigger vision is that San Diego State wants to ensure that it is fully meeting the needs of San Diego's innovation economy, our biotech industry, engineering, and they're hearing from the employers that they're not necessarily getting what they need out of their graduates. And they're looking at how do we increase enrollment in those areas. And they saw our community college district as a primary way that they could do that. If we were to collaborate on the curriculum, on the courses, the sequences, from the point that somebody's coming into our district through to earning a bachelor's degree, build that facility in Mission Valley, just across the street, over by the stadium, have community college students sitting in classrooms beside upper division students, co-designed and taught by community college faculty and university faculty. The same type of benefits I was talking about with dual enrollment, our students no longer have to wonder, can I successfully transfer and complete higher level coursework at San Diego State? I know I can because I've been there and I've done it. Will I come into a new environment and all the support and belonging I felt when I was at City College, Mesa College, Miramar College is gone, and now the imposter syndrome is back, and I feel out of place. I've already built relationships with people in my degree pathway. The ability to go to a 10th grader in our high schools and say, if you're interested in engineering now, here is your pathway all the way through to a master's degree at San Diego State. And that pathway to a bachelor's is guaranteed if you meet the academic requirements. How powerful that promise is. How many students don't get in to impacted programs at San Diego State and then just don't go to college for a while? And then a while turns into life happens and I never make it there. How much we could add to expanding opportunities for people. We'll see if we get through all of the mechanics that need to be worked through in order to get there, but that's the goal. That's why it's important. So I'm going to end on the Housing Finance Authority. So Los Angeles and the Bay Area in 2015 and 2019 went through a tremendous amount of effort and coalition building to get standalone legislation to establish regional housing finance authorities. In Bay Area, it's called BAFA, the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. In LA, it's called La Casa, the Los Angeles County Housing Solutions Agency. In the Bay Area, they needed 9 counties and over 100 cities to come together in agreement on what they would propose to do and then get somebody in the Senate to bring a bill forward. In LA, they did it all within LA County, but more than 70 different cities and a whole host of homelessness services agencies that had to come into agreement around that. San Diego tried in that same time frame and failed each time to get that coalition of agreement between San Diego County, between the city of San Diego and other cities in our area. So Senator Nancy Skinner in 2024 introduced a bill that would just destroy that process of having to go get a bunch of coalition together and said any 2 government agencies with elected boards can come together and form a separate legal entity, a housing finance authority, with the ability to take tax measures to voters in order to be able to buy land, build and operate affordable housing, acquire existing housing, convert it to affordable housing, provide renter protections and other things. So we came in with San Diego Unified and said, let's form that authority. And we did it in May 2025, working towards building affordable housing that is not student housing, is not employee housing, but is a community for anybody who wants to live in San Diego, who meets the income qualifications to benefit from. So I mentioned earlier, San Diego Unified's declining enrollment and how that might have us thinking about enrollment strategies. 10 years ago, San Diego Unified enrollment was over 120,000 students. Today, it's under 95,000. Why? Housing affordability. San Diego is losing its middle class because you cannot graduate from college with debt, get an entry-level job, even in a high-wage occupation, start a family, and buy a house. So as I walk around my neighborhood, and we're coming up in 2 months, it'll be that time of year, I'll see the signs pop up like you all do. Students graduating college. And I ask my neighbors as I see them, like, so where's your kid going? They have a job lined up? None of them answer, oh yeah, they're staying here. They're going to Austin, Texas. They're going to Phoenix, Arizona, parts of Nevada, Fresno, Bakersfield, because of the cost of living here. So if we could build communities at scale, not a couple hundred affordable housing units, but 4,000 in the heart of downtown San Diego, around that Civic Center redesigned plaza. We could build pathways to the middle class that are completely aligned with our educational mission. I've worked in civil rights around employment, my time in the Department of Labor, working now in civil rights around access to education in our district, and embracing the opportunity, the ability to respond to the housing situation enabled by this legislation and leading on civil rights and housing, all interconnected around those values. So that is what I wanted to share with you. What work have we been doing? Why have we been doing it? How are we showing up in this moment? So that you'll understand as we chart the course ahead, what is guiding those decisions? Why work on this thing now? It's all in alignment with uplifting people that we have underinvested in, communities we have under-resourced, or we have marginalized, and putting our first attention there, and then continuing to work on other aspects of it. With that, I went a little bit over open dialogue, questions, comments, feedback. What do you want to talk about? Sorry, it always takes a minute. It's okay. Quiet group.
Hi, my name is Glenn, and while you were presenting the information and with your slides, I actually could follow, and I wanted to like respond to those slides as you were going. And so now, now that we are in this position where we can't like recollect those slides,
Everything that was there, yeah.
it's kind of hard to like present a question. I mean, we're dealing with a lot, and for you to have the vision that you have for what you want us to, aspire to, so that we can have our children move forward in a district like this so that they can go to that four-year college and get their degree. But they're faced with a lot of like confusing times right now. And they're like struggling with just the very basic mental health, like you brought in your table. They're faced with like, you know, what is real, what's not real. You brought up AI, and I'm like, well, how many of us have seen AI videos online and wonder, is that a human being that's bringing that information out, or is that AI? And we're like faced with like questions of like what's true and what's not true, and they're faced. I've never had. I don't think we've ever seen this where it's like our kids are like struggling with with that idea, and then they're struggling because we are still trying to figure that out too. Like this is a place we've never been, AI, and whether we should trust this technology, and so my immediate response is to like you were saying too, like no, we don't need that. That technology is trying to take our jobs and replace us as human beings. And why do I have to verify that I'm a human being every single time I go to this website? And so, my point is that then we're like now we're in a war situation, and this economy is all crazy, and like the parking situation's crazy, and traffic is crazy. So we're like just trying to meet like just the basic everyday stuff. You brought up mental health, we see that in student services where students are calling like, man, I don't know how I'm going to make it. I'm a working parent, and I just need that financial aid. And I'm like, I understand this is a very tough time, but you should speak to a counselor and consider all the options you have. We're going to do everything we can for you and make sure you get the service you need. So I really appreciate this perspective that you have, but I don't even know what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that it's a hard question. Like you're asking us to give you feedback on, and it's hard to remember because our attention is all messed up now, because we're looking like, like right, like this morning on the way, like there's an accident on the 805s, big fire, shut down the south, people coming from north to south, and so like we're constantly being like, you know, bombarded with that kind of stuff. But you're looking at a future where like, the civic center is being remodeled possibly, and including like museum style development. And I've been there a few times. I've graduated in that building, and I've done some stuff in that building too, in that area. So my point is that it's that we appreciate this perspective, and but we don't know where we're gonna, like, we are just grappling with all those other things. And so we are hoping that you have, and we're hoping to meet you where you are. And that's just my perspective. So I just wanted to comment, if anything.
Thank you for sharing the humanity, right, of what you're experiencing, what you're seeing in the world. It is heavy. And I have to break away sometimes. And like, I'm just not going to look at my phone, have the TV on, news for the next 6 hours, because I've reached my capacity. I need time to disconnect and reflect. So I'll share, what I come back to as I go through those moments where the gravity of it feels overwhelming. What's the next individual thing that I can work on that will touch somebody's life in my immediate vicinity? That's progress, right? Just you're standing up and saying that. I'm assuming somebody in the room is feeling every word you said and said, yeah, somebody's saying it. That moment of recognition, like somebody sees and understands me right now, has value. us being in community together in this work has value. And so I said this, I think, back in the spring last year, we can't let the challenges of this flurry of executive orders cause us to not show up tomorrow for our students. We're saying, I desperately want to accomplish this thing. Will you help me? So when you take that time to talk to that student who's like, I don't know if I'm going to make it, I need support. And you're saying, like, no, the support's there. There's a counselor waiting to talk to you. There are people that are waiting to help serve you in this journey. That is immensely valuable. And it's not just one person. It's that person, and it's everybody who's counting on them. It's everybody they go forward and tell that story. At a moment where I needed it, somebody saw me, somebody cared, somebody spent. And the more we hear those stories, the more that it overpowers the stories of things that are going on in the world that are dehumanizing, that are terrorizing, that cause us to have existential fear about the future. So you showing up and being part of it and telling your story alone has value. With that moment of conversation, that's what I was talking about earlier with, if we could spend less time doing the data entry, doing the routine and the monotonous aspect of the work, we could do more of that. And we don't need to be licensed clinical therapists to tell somebody, you're important to me, and I'm here to serve you right now. And the immense value in mental health that that can bring, just knowing that that kind of engagement's out there. So thank you for the work you're doing, but just thank you for opening up and sharing, even though there wasn't necessarily a specific question. It reaffirms my commitment to the work. Because there are times where I really don't want to do this part of the job. That's why I do it, though, is what you just shared. Thank you. Yeah, it is worth applauding, clapping for. Thank you. That's not easy to stand up and necessarily say those things.
Hello, my name is Crystal. I don't have a question either, but since Glenn is being human, I thought I could be human as well. Trying to recall the slides. And I really thought I should have brought my notebook and pen, but
All right, we need to bring the slides back up. There weren't that many. I can probably find the one.
It's okay.
You know, no, you sure?
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment. I know, and I might not be the most articulate, but going back to the whole 36-hour weeks, I just wanted to make a comment. You know, we mentioned that a lot of us were parents and, you know, we do have life outside of work. And I just want to say that since the pilot launched, I've been able to volunteer. I'm not going to get emotional, I promise.
It's okay if you do.
I've been able to volunteer at my child's school. And I was asking my manager, like, what can we do to have this keep going? Because I know it's just a pilot, but it's so nice to be able to be a parent and not just be a worker who supports a child. I was able to lead the dance station for the Kids Heart Challenge. And do you know how awesome yet difficult it is to teach hundreds of children to do the cha-cha slide or the Cupid shuffle, or even the YMCA? Most of the kids wanted to do the Macarena, and I was very happy. But anyways, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate it, and it almost makes me want to work harder to show the benefits of the 36 hours, because even just going home, I get to enjoy the house that I pay for, because I feel like we spend so much time outside of the home, and we don't get to enjoy the home, and my dogs appreciate it too. So thank you from my dogs. So I just wanted to say I just wanted to bring that up. I don't know if that's going to make a difference, but as a mother, I absolutely appreciate. I hope it can be something permanent. So yay for that. And then something I also wanted to bring up too is, and I'm not just saying this because my supervisor is right here, but I absolutely love my job. I love my team. I love working at the district. I know, you know, sometimes people say negative things because it's better to be on campus than on the district because it's so boring and there's no students and all the things, right? But I absolutely love it. And you know, I've been blessed to have a husband that can help me financially support my family too. And right now, things are fine, things are comfortable, but insurance is going up, property taxes are going up, and you know, we're short-staffed. There's not very many opportunities within our office to promote unless we try to reclass or we try to find ways. And I don't want to leave the district or my team, but I don't want there to be a situation where I have no choice. So I guess my question, well, I guess it's not a question is, but I hope there is opportunities in the future for us because I don't want to leave. I don't think my husband will allow me to leave because the benefits are amazing. I think we have the best benefits in San Diego County. And I brag about that to all my friends that work at other districts. But anyways, I'm being completely authentic and human. This is me, I talk too much. But I just, and all the workshops, all the academies, I do my best to take advantage of those because I think I'm a lifetime learner. It's funny because when I was a child, I hated school and learning, but as an adult, I'm obsessed with it. But I guess I just wanted to say, I hope that there is more opportunity within like our office or in all the departments. That way we can continue to keep up with the financial demands of life, I guess, without having to go outside. And I know I mentioned that we're short-staffed too, and I get it. There's a whole budget crisis thing, and just there's a lot of things happening. But I love like where I work, and I just want to keep it that way if possible. But yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. So there are a few things in there. I hope I capture everything that I wanted to respond to. But first to start, thank you for just normalizing emotion as a fundamental part of being human. I don't know why. I used to really buy into this idea, like if you're going to be in professional America, you got to be this stoic, non-human entity. And somehow that's normal and that's the way we think it is. And like we deny ourselves one of the most fundamental aspects of being human is our emotions and the power that come with them. And I was in a space earlier this spring where somebody said, after people were talking about some things that become normal in our jobs, like let's stop and think about a moment, what have we allowed to be normalized? And why do we do that? Why are we okay with the idea that some of these things are normal? That we should encourage to criticize people for showing emotion at work? Why is that the normal way we should do things? And coming out of that space, one of my commitment is there's some things I'm going to intentionally create new norms around and not tolerate the way that it's been because I have the ability to do that and lean on that in some ways. So thank you for making this a human space. Your feedback does absolutely matter on the impacts of the 36-hour operational schedule. Yes, there will be math that's done on this about costs. There are some things that we have to backfill those hours, and it'll introduce some costs in the equation. But this is not purely a spreadsheet decision. The human impact was part of the point. And there was a very similar story to what you told that somebody in the human resources office told me as we were working on the remote work policy years ago, that during COVID, because I was home and because we had these expanded flexibilities to stop working for a while, I realized how little time I was getting with my kids Monday through Friday and how terrible that time was. It was, 5:15 pickup from daycare and school, this routine of like, I've got to get you to do your homework, and now I've got to get you to eat dinner, and now I got to get you to get shower time and brush your teeth and go to bed. And there was no love and joy in that. It was just like, I'm fulfilling this fundamental responsibility as the caretaker of your life. And it wasn't until the weekends that we had time to go to the park and play and connect at that more human level. And that was one of the most impactful things on how the remote work policy got developed, that it should be intertwined with the idea of split shifts and schedules and maximum flexibilities within the work that needs to be done and the capacity of the individual to manage that, so that we each have some agency in being able to create that time. I have a 4-year-old, so everything you were talking about, I absolutely feel. Like if I were to leave right now, I might be able to make her ballet class. Probably not going to make it tonight. And that's a sacrifice we have to make. And I'm not complaining, but I know that very, very personally. So my goal is if we can make it feasible so that that can be permanent, then let's do the work on making it feasible. It might not be comfortable. It might not be easy. It might not be the thing that I want to work on. The ROI is too great not to put maximum effort into it. And maybe the answer ultimately is we can't, but it's not going to be for lack of trying or for the conventional response of, well, just that's not the way that professional life, or people shouldn't even ask for that. The responses that I've gotten around the state when I've told people we're doing this, just say this, I am not popular among my colleagues. In part because if we make it work, they lose the excuse that it can't work, right? I'm going to lose whatever else I was going to respond to in that you said. So I'll just stop there and open up other opportunities. Poppy.
I'm Poppy Fitch. I'm Dean for Wellness and Disability Support Programs and Services. So I just want to say my heart is just beaming at conversations about emotions and humanity in the workplace. I also want to plug that for all of us who are struggling, we have an amazing EAP and great mental health coverage in our employee insurance plans. So please use them. That wasn't what I wanted to get up to say. I am mindful that last month a court vacated the mandate that the administration had the Department of Education send out about DEI in the Dear Colleague letter last year in February. So the fact is it's not been legal. And there hasn't been as much conversation about that as I thought there might be. And it's been great to be in a district where we swatted it away like a fly. Thank you very much. And Gallup just released a survey talking about the public perception of the value of higher education, not actually being in step with what students perceive the value that they gained. There's a mismatch there. And I think in both of those cases, it's about information campaigns, and that once the information is out there in the world, the damage is done, and it's a lot of work to undo that damage. And so I guess what comes to my mind is in what ways can we feel better about our work in higher education, feel really good about our work in higher education, and swat away like a fly the stories about, the general public doesn't perceive higher education as having value, because we know that it does. And data tells us that it does. And we know that we're doing the right work. And now, courts have said that that's true. I guess I'm trying to figure out, what can be done to undo the damage that is clearly happening right in front of our eyes. And help us not feel so much the way I heard Glenn articulating in his earlier comments, which is despair, confusion, difficulty focusing even because there's so much coming at us.
Yeah. Lot to potentially get into there. So as you were talking, Poppy, I thought about something I didn't say in connection to my niece's story. The majority of my family has no college education. And the part about that I don't talk about very often is many people in my family resent me. And they impose upon me the idea that I think they are better than they are because I went to college. And what's behind that? I can't go in and engage with that as okay, let's fight about it. I'm going to convince you by domineering this conversation with data or points that make you feel wrong. What's the humanity behind what they're saying? For one reason or another, college wasn't an option for me. I was made to feel during my K-12 experience like I wasn't that smart, that my teacher didn't want me there. Other kids made fun of me. So I now remember what I was going to say about hating school when you're young. I've said this in other spaces. How many people I've heard that hated going to school? But when moments of learning happened, I've never seen anybody upset and mad about it. It's a magical moment but the social structure around learning and the pressure to show up with all the answers or you're stupid, and that kind of language actually being used by adults in those spaces. And that's what members of my family are responding to. I resent what was never available to me. Perceived or real doesn't matter anymore. That is their reality. And the fact that you have it makes me mad. And then I lash out with that emotion at you with it. There's an opportunity for a human connection there that is responsive to whatever experiences. So the more I talked to members of my family to understand where that feeling came from, and the better I understood how to engage with them to start to change that understanding. And so telling our story one at a time to people in our circle, whether that's local within our community, it's across social media, those things can be used for good to help people unlearn the myths and the stories and the things they have adopted as being true that we know are not true. There was an interesting exercise I did when I was up at Shasta College. A person who had been working on issues around the way that people engaged around contentious issues. And this was being done in the late or the early 2010s. But he would have, so we went through this exercise. We took transparency paper, like the old overhead paper, and we would draw a timeline of our life, ups and downs, all these significant events. And then another person would do that, and you would come together and hold the sheet in front of your face and try to talk to each other about what was on the sheet. And then what it was illustrating is that everything that that person is saying to me is being filtered through all of those experiences. And everything they're saying is being filtered through all of their experiences. So miscommunication is often a lack of understanding of what is framing what I'm trying to say and what you're hearing from me. And so we can get into this really aggressive argument about abortion rights and never get at what we're actually disagreeing about, which is not legislation or the Supreme Court. There's human experience between us that we've not bothered to understand and explore. And so he would facilitate these sessions where he would get people that previously had been screaming each other across demonstration lines to sit down and connect at a human level. Not that we have to go to that extreme, but I think that idea of how do I engage with a person in the moment that I have an opportunity to help reframe their understanding. So in a very different context, when I was in DC last year, I got into a Lyft to go up to one of our meetings on the Capitol Hill. And the driver just started chatting. Where are you from? What are you doing here? And after I told him I was from San Diego, and we got to the what you're doing here part, he got very quiet and looked in the mirror with a more serious look on his face, said, "What is it like there?" And it took me a minute, like, what do you mean? Like, what is it like where? In San Diego. And so like the look on his face and the seriousness of it did not make any sense to me at this point. I'm like, it's perpetually 70 degrees, sunny, the beach is nearby. It's kind of fantastic. I almost feel bad saying this. It's 28 degrees here right now. Like, I don't want to tell you how great it is there. And no, like with the immigration stuff. What do you, I don't understand what you're asking me. What do you mean the immigration stuff? Well, I just see like all the violence and like it has to be pretty bad, right? Whatever media, social media, whatever he had experienced had suggested to him, with him never experiencing it himself, that if you're that close to the border, it must be borderline war going on in your community. So that was a moment to explain, like, you should just come to San Diego, especially this time of year, because it's really cold here. But two, you should really come see it. It is beautiful. The diversity of our community and what that brings enriches our everyday, like it is amazing to live in a place like that. And you really should come see it firsthand. I promise you, it's plenty safe. Like scale of American cities, it's got to be way up the list. But his reality on something he had never experienced had been shaped in it. So the same way that members of my family who've never been to a college campus have all of these really deeply held opinions about what must be happening at college campuses. Exposure, experience, compassion for where they're coming from. So I talked in the fall about the idea of creating belonging without othering, and understanding at some level, even though I'm very critical of it, of somebody with no context seeing Hispanic serving institution and feeling, well, I'm not Hispanic, so clearly you don't want me there. I think there is a understandable human reaction to that idea. Now, once you learn just a little bit about what that label means, I would hope that you relieve yourself of that assumption of what it means and what it doesn't mean. But I get that initial response, that this feels like exclusion when we're actually doing inclusion. But that doesn't happen unless we engage and talk, right? So it was a very long-winded answer, but I think ultimately we have control over the individual interactions that we have with people and how we choose to engage in them. And at least in my life, I've had zero success with beating people over the head with what I wanted them to understand. When I've approached it with compassion and understanding, I've made way more progress in helping to influence how they understand the world. Not yet.
I can speak loud enough.
Oh, try it again. He turned the volume up. There you go.
Hello. All right. Thank you, Chancellor, for your comments. And my name's Eddie Pahi. I work in the Student Services Office as a prerequisite evaluator. I'm the newest addition as of October of last year. I have had the opportunity to work in every major university in San Diego County. So I come with a lot of experience. And one of the things I want to, first, I have a comment. My comment is the 36-hour work week has not only given me the privilege to be a parent for my daughter again, but also to be a caregiver to a disabled parent. And I know I'm not the only one in the district. So my hope is that something like that continues to allow that flexibility for the employees to continue that cultural familial responsibility that they look forward to. My question, though, is some of the stuff that you've talked about that we're currently working on. I'll say we because we're a team on this. Some of these are 10, 15-year initiatives. And one of the things from my professional experience, I've heard, especially in the last 10 to 15 years of students and educators, is fear. Fear of housing stability, food stability. And what are we going to do for the here and now for those folks?
Yeah, it's a really important question. So there are a number of resources that the colleges have been able to cultivate with limited institutional investment, so partnership with different agencies to connect students. So I think, for example, if you were to go down to the Basic Needs Hub at City College, you would find people that have created relationships with a number of different county and city services that a student can come in there and they sit down and have a conversation with them about what their immediate needs are and have at their disposal 10 or 15 different things that they might be able to link them to help benefit. But we can't do that at scale, right? Like you can serve dozens of students a day potentially doing that, but we have thousands of students in need. And so this is where, how are we building as much as we can today and then looking at how do we have a transformational future. So the fundraising campaign that we've launched, Basic Needs is the second pillar for me. So for example, next week, we'll be having a meeting to bring folks from the San Diego Food Bank to tour our pantries at each of our colleges. And the goal of that is that by the end of this year, we've quadrupled the amount of food that is coming into those to be able to distribute to students. Not 5 years from now, but in the fall that we're building that. And so they very generously said, yeah, we will come lend our expertise to help you build this, and also to be able to articulate the value proposition to go out and connect with philanthropists who want to support that kind of work and show them, if you give us this money, we can deliver. And it's not just us saying it. The food bank is right here saying, no, we're in partnership. and lending our expertise to help with that. So as we get into things that are outside of our norm, and I could tell you the same kind of stories around housing, that we're not just out there saying like, oh, we'll just figure it out on our own. A lot of expertise to tap into to support us in that. But it's things like that in the present. How do we raise additional funds to be able to expand the scope of what we're doing so that more people can benefit from it? On the employee side, we did a survey. Over 1,000 employees, if I recall, participated in back in the fall to understand what is the type of housing that our employees would like to have. Because it's not going to be the same as students, right? I think the majority of us are not looking for, if I could have a shared bedroom and a 4-bedroom suite with somebody, I got a family, kid is very, very different. So we need to understand the need. And we already have UCSD, San Diego State, and others saying, hey, we've built some housing. If you want to come up with an agreement to have people sharing it. So I expect that by the end of this calendar year, we can begin to make the first opportunities available in partnership with others as we explore what might we be able to construct. The same as San Diego Unified goes into a really large scale campaign to build affordable housing for their employees. There's probably opportunities to partner around that. So it's leveraging the communities around us to see us as partners in the work that they're doing, to be able to expand the opportunity in the short term while we build our capacity to dramatically expand our offerings in the long term. Kind of a shorter way of, there's a lot more we could get into there, but yeah, thanks for the question.
I know we're not at housing yet in the district, but one of the things that helped me decide when my son was going to college is the university guaranteed the pricing in 2-year increments. So it really made it affordable for planning and saving and that kind of thing. So that 2-year increment was one of the key factors in choosing that university.
Yeah, so having security around, I mean, kind of like our lease, right? I rent, so I know that. I love when landlord says, we'll give you a 2-year lease. Good, I have 24 months of price certainty. And so as we go into this, you know, at City College with our first district-run housing development, I think we'll be looking at the same models of how do we do security on cost over time, while also appropriately planning for the cost escalations that'll happen and what it takes to maintain that housing. Yes, microphone coming behind you.
Sorry. Hi, my name's Birds. I had a question about like the AI stuff. Like you mentioned like sort of like data entry, but you also mentioned like something about the machine learning, like seeing where the students were struggling and some of the stuff. And I was wondering, A, how we're going to ensure the security of that data, and B, how we ensure that students don't like feel surveilled when they're like on Canvas. Because I know even before, like, because I went to Mesa College, I already kind of felt surveilled on Canvas. So that's my question.
Yeah, really important question. So that starts with any service provider that we do business with, the details of what goes into that contract and the protections around that data are essential. The reputations of the company for actually following the language of the contract, because it's one thing to have it in there saying they won't use it this way. It's another thing to know that they're not using it that way. And people lie all the time, right? Even big corporations, perhaps especially big corporations, but now I'm doing commentary. But it starts with that security around what mechanisms do we have within the contract itself to enforce that? How much can we limit their exposure to the data? So we're using their application, but that doesn't mean that we have to agree that the data will be stored by them and we have a license to access it. It could be stored by us and they don't have access to that data. It's in transparency with students about what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're using it, and what security we're offering them, and what remedies are available if we fail to live up to our end of those commitments, so they know. I mean, it is an interesting moment where so many people at such a young age give away so much of their personal information in so many ways to social media. So it'll be interesting to watch how this evolves. For how many people is this a significant concern? For how many is it, like, I wasn't even aware or thinking about this and I don't care. But for the district, it will be incredibly important. And this is also just what I was saying about who do our lawmakers listen to and what kind of laws do they write? Because that's ultimately where the accountability can come from. If we have strong federal and state laws about the privacy of that data and an enforcement mechanism at the state and federal level that do not require individuals to come forward and say, I've been harmed, but are proactively monitoring and assuring that the way that those companies act and behave is essential in this, because that's probably the best guarantee that we could have, that we know that there is a strong enforcement mechanism for bad actors in this space, and that we are all collectively really worried about what bad actors could do with these AI tools. So I think those are all key elements. So we have been very deliberate about slowly developing our first policy to address this, but some of what you just brought up will be core elements. That a policy that prohibits the district from entering into a contract with a company that doesn't provide those data security elements, that prohibits us from putting any confidential or personally identifiable information into an LLM outside of a district's contractual arrangement. Because we both know if you go into ChatGPT and upload a batch of records and say, give me some insights, you have just turned all of that over to OpenAI willfully. And so we need safeguards around that and a mechanism to address it should it happen. Those will all be elements in the first policy that we develop around this, and then become standards of practice for us going forward. We're at 4:20. There's one more, and then have to wrap us up. One more comment or question. Going once, going twice. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you for the engagement. I appreciate each and every one of you and the work that you're doing. We'll see you around at the various events over the rest of the spring. Have a great rest of your week.